Good evening and welcome to Raconteurs News on this Tuesday. It's the 18th of August 2020. It's got to be the year when everybody's vision came back because, it's just been a terrible time for anybody that's got a brain and doesn't want to wear a mask and do all that stuff. But hopefully 2020 will be gone soon, and 2021 hopefully won't be as bad. But I've got the suspicion it's going to be even worse. But anyway, enough of me talking like that nonsense and being all downbeat and everything. Good evening to everybody. Everyone in the chat room, Super Leeds. We'll not comment on that. Bandit Buster, Maximizer, Regina IR, Mello, Dave Iron. Good evening to everybody, and thank you for your continued support. We've got a great show tonight and a great guest as well. As you can see from behind me, learning holidays, you might get some idea of what we are going to be talking about tonight. And joining me tonight is from last year, it's Gloria Moss, Professor Gloria Moss, I'm going to say. Good evening, Gloria. How are you doing? Professor.
I'm fine. No, don't forget the professor. I'm fine, Jason. It's great to be back on your show. Yeah.
Good. Well, listen, we've got you back on. You've got you got in touch with me. We had you on last year, and you did this conference in Hertfordshire, Questioning History. You did. What was it? The same last year? Was it Questioning History as well? Was that the same theme last year?
It was Questioning History last year, and the success of last year, and the fact that people seem to enjoy it so much, has led us to think we should continue with this year as well.
Indeed, and as Mark Devlin says, anybody putting on a conference in 2020 is an act of resistance. So all plaudits to you for that. So just tell us about. Just give us a brief summary about yourself and last year's event and how it went and what did you bring from it, and just general stuff about last year and about yourself as well, Gloria. Just for anybody, we've got a different listenership this year. We seem to get a different listenership, all the time, different people. So perhaps some people that didn't hear you last year. So just give us just a little bit of background on yourself and the conference last year. How did it go?
Well, yeah. I think what I'd say about myself is something that I share with many of the people who came to the conference last year, and probably with many of your listeners as well. And that is that I have a great sense of intellectual curiosity. I think you probably have this as well, Jason. We're the sort of people who endlessly asking questions about the present and about the past. And that's led me personally to follow a number of different lines of inquiry. So I've done a lot of research on gender differences, cognitive gender differences, at a time when people generally didn't want to talk about cognitive gender differences. I found enormous evidence for the fact that men and women don't perceive the world in the same way. And I'm talking about the way they see the world visually. So I did many years of research on that. I've published several books on that. One of them is Gender Design and Marketing, if anybody's interested. Another one has got the rather snazzy title of Why Men Like Straight Lines and Women Like Polka Dots. And we need to recognize that we're not all the same, and that maybe men and women do quite literally see the world in different ways because of their evolutionary differences. Men evolved as hunters. They focus on the distant horizon. They're not focused on color. They're not focused on detail. Whereas women were the gatherers, the nurturers, the managers of the camp. So women have better color vision. Men have better 3D vision. These are arguably evolved from the 99% of human history when men were hunters and women were gatherers. And we still bear the legacy of this. Men love straight lines. Think of an Amazon website. It's full of straight lines, not much detail. But women, by contrast, love a great deal of color. They prefer a two-dimensional look and a slightly, dare I say it, more light-hearted look at things. So I spent many years doing this work on gender and design, which I hope has brought valuable insights to people involved in marketing to men and in particular marketing to women. Because actually, I don't know if you realize this, Jason, but 83% of all purchases are actually made by women. So it's quite important to know what they like in terms of shapes and colors and so on. And I should say about a similar proportion of web designers and product designers and graphic designers are actually men. So we have men who design in a particular way, lots of straight lines and relatively few colors, designing for women who like something very different. They like lots of color, they like round shapes. So these were completely new, fresh insights based on lots of very carefully conducted studies, all born of asking a question: do men and women perceive the world in the same way or not? So I think we're all united, listeners, yourself, myself, by an innate intellectual curiosity. And that intellectual curiosity also led me to explore patterns of leadership. Do men and women lead other people in the same way? And what kind of leadership will maximize productivity in our organizations? I mean, we're facing pretty grim times at the moment. What style of leadership do we need to get the world back on its feet? And what I would say is what we need is anything but the toxic, authoritarian, top-down managerialism that we see today in so many organizations, particularly in the public sector, whether it's in the National Health Service or in our universities or local authorities. We don't need this authoritarian style of leadership. No, we need a far more inclusive style, which the research I've conducted shows leads to much higher levels of productivity, much greater motivation from people, and importantly, much greater mental well-being. And then another line of research that I've pursued, going back over 20 years, has been historical. So, this habit.
I'm sorry, Gloria, I just want to go back.
Yeah.
I mean, what you were talking about there, the studies that you did between men and women, I mean, those sort of things would be shouted down these days in the climate that we find ourselves in. I mean, it would be stifled. There's not even a debate anymore. People can't debate these things. I mean, do you find that frustrating that we're not allowed to debate these things? If you went on a show and you said, well, you went on let's just say a news show, and you said a mainstream one, and you said, well, men and women are designed differently, and men can do certain things better and women can do other things better than men. I mean, you'd be shouted down. I mean, it's that sort of talk has been stifled. Any debate on that has just been completely stifled.
Well, it has to a great extent. Certainly amongst sociologists, it would be stifled. Perhaps to a lesser extent amongst psychologists. So, for example, Simon Baron-Cohen, professor of psychology at Cambridge University, he wrote a book which explores these differences in detail and in a rather fascinating way. And in the work I've done, which, as I said, focuses on the visual, not, for example, on the way men and women use language or emotions, which are also very interesting areas of study. But my focus has been on the visual. And I would say that absolutely there is no reason whatsoever to be embarrassed or to be silenced about the findings that men and women perceive the world in different ways, because after differences in height between men and women, and I'm sure most people would agree that on balance, men are taller than women, would you say? Most people would buy into that.
Yeah,
After
I mean,
height,
my wife said that she'd never marry anybody smaller than her.
okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I mean,
that's interesting.
well, I was
Yeah.
taller than her, but yeah, go on. Sorry.
So after height, the next biggest sex difference is to do with the visual spatial. And this is agreed on by numerous psychologists. There are things called meta-studies where people compare findings across a number of different studies. And in these very robust articles comparing the findings of psychologists in the areas of visual spatial abilities, there are consistently findings of significant differences in the visual spatial skills of men and women. So, for example, it's said that men have better 3D vision than women. So all those jokes about women not being so good at parking as men may have their roots in physiological differences, because in fact, a little known fact, but nevertheless well evidenced for that, is that men's eyes are spaced slightly further apart than women's eyes. You could take a measuring device and compare the distance between the eyes of your male and female friends, and what you'll find is that on average, men's eyes are spaced 5 millimeters further apart than women's eyes are. This is fact. This isn't opinion, and that gives them better 3D vision than women whose eyes are spaced closer together. And it's some evolutionary psychologists would argue that this is a mechanism that history has put in place to help men with the task of hunting, because you do need to be able to target your prey to be a successful hunter. By contrast, American researchers have suggested that up to 50% of women may have a fourth color pigment over men's 3 color pigments. Apparently no men have more than 3 color pigments. But according to these American researchers, up to 50% of women have a 4th color pigment. Now, you may think, well, moving from 3 to 4 color pigments, that's not a big deal. But actually it is, because when you move from 3 to 4 color pigments, you move from being able to see millions of colors to being able to see hundreds of millions of colors. So again, all those jokes that the women are so fussy about colors in the car showroom, that also has a basis in fact, because if and there's a lot of evidence for it, women have this 4th color pigment, they actually see vastly more colors than men do. And that could also be nature's adaptive mechanism for women, because women were the main gatherers in the community. They had to gather berries. They needed to have very good color vision to be able to discern the ripe from the unripe berries. And they were also the nurturers in the community. And when I say nurturers, I mean nurturers of infants as well as adults, because they were the main managers of the day, because the men were off hunting and women were in charge of base camp. So the women were the main managers of the day, and they needed color vision to discern whether the children whether their temperatures were slightly elevated. You don't need to do the kind of physical checks that we see emerging today to see if temperatures are elevated. You can just look at the colors of people's cheeks. Yeah. And of course, if people are about to erupt into anger, you can see that their faces also change color, and typically people become redder in the face. so you could argue that this superior, if you like, spatial ability that men display and the superior colour vision that women display were both adaptive mechanisms for the 99% of human history when men and women were hunters and gatherers respectively.
Yeah.
And so, people could try and push aside this evidence if they wanted to, but they would look pretty stupid because the evidence is so strong.
So there is, like, I mean, there is something in it when the joke is that a woman, if a bloke says I bought a new car, the first thing the woman will say is what colour is it, or there is some evolutionary reasoning behind that. That's what you found.
Well, that's what I would suggest, and the research takes us further, because I carried out numerous studies in which I presented designs to people. They could be websites that had been created by men, created by women, and I asked the men and the women who didn't know why I was asking them this question, of course. So the research was blind in that sense. I asked them which of these designs they preferred. And usually the designs were controlled for subject matter. So if I showed people, for example, graphic designs, they would all be on the same theme. A chocolate box, for example, designed by men or designed by women. Or they could be websites, personal websites, designed by men, designed by women. And I don't know if you could possibly guess what results kept emerging, study upon study upon study. What did we find in successive studies? What we found was that the men preferred the designs that men had created, and the women preferred the designs that the women had created. And the extent of the preference on the part of both the men and the women was as statistically significant as you will ever find in statistical tests. I mean, the statistics were off the wall.
Right.
I mean, they were so strong.
And these people didn't know. They were just picking which one they preferred, and
yes,
most men picked the one that was designed by men, and the women picked the one designed by. That's really,
yes.
I mean,
and I did this across age groups as well. So I remember one Christmas, I thought I'll do something that's seasonal. So I selected some Christmas cards, again with similar themes, but some Christmas cards that had been designed by men and some Christmas cards that had been designed by women. And I showed them to unsuspecting people, both adults and children. And the same result emerged. And I did this first of all in the UK, and then I expanded my sites overseas and rolled this out to 4 other countries. I think it was 4 or maybe 5 other countries. And in all of these countries, whether it was Britain or China or Hungary or France or Germany, same results, Jason, everywhere.
Wow. So when we've done 20 minutes already on this one. We've not even got anywhere near the conference. So let's talk about last year's conference. Let's talk about when you first got interested in history, and what has happened to history over the years, and which I mean, many people know. I mean, it said that winners write the history, but there's been a lot of, even in my 50 years, I can think of probably 3 or 4 things that have been completely in my opinion, have been completely lied about. When did you first get interested in history and start questioning it?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It is, again, this intellectual curiosity that bubbles up, I'm sure, with all of us and your listeners. And I don't know, it was way back in the 1680s sorry, in the, what am I talking about? The 19, I'm not that old, in the 1980s, that I started reading about Christopher Wren, or should I say Sir Christopher Wren. And there was one fact that really intrigued me, and that was that he spent the whole of his life in Britain, with the exception of one period of 6 months when he went over to Paris. And that was in the spring of 1665. And he went over to Paris and he made a detailed note of street planning. And he was particularly interested in domed buildings, I should say, of which there were a couple in Paris. And then he came back to London and suggested that the then Gothic Cathedral of St. Paul's should be demolished and replaced by a domed building. That's interesting, isn't it? He didn't get his way. And then in September 1666, what happened in that fateful month? Well, we had the Great Fire of London, which gave him the opportunity to do what he'd been pressing to do, which was rebuild the Gothic Cathedral of St. Paul's with a dome. And it struck me at the time as a bit of a coincidence, really, that he went abroad on this one occasion, studying street architecture in Paris and paying particular attention to domes. And then, well, lo and behold, the following year, he had the opportunity to rebuild London, thanks to the Great Fire of London. So that was one of my earlier access points to history. And it was just last year that I wrote up an article on the Great Fire of London. Your listeners can find it on the Off Guardian website, where they publish my article with a video of myself walking around the important sites in London and presenting the evidence, because indeed, if you look at the evidence, it is rather interesting, extremely interesting. For example, we hear from a nonconformist minister of the day, Thomas Vincent, that the fire was blowing in the opposite direction to the wind.
Right.
The fire was blowing
like
in the opposite direction to the wind. And another strange anomaly was that the Gothic St. Paul's Cathedral stood in an open enclosure. So how did it catch fire? Well, when you dig deep, you find evidence that, quite apart from the wind blowing in the opposite direction to the fire, people were sighted actually throwing fireballs. Interesting, no? I wasn't taught that when I was at school. And so the more you look at the evidence, the more you have to ask yourself questions about this event. Was it the accident that we're still taught that it was? Well, I'll leave your listeners to judge for themselves if they read the article and look at the video. But I that was one of the first occasions on which I thought, well, we really do have to ask questions. And then from there, I went much further back into the past and became very interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls site of Qumran, which is the site where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, I can come on to that later. But again, it's just the process of using the intellectual curiosity we have to ask questions about the official story, about the official story that we're being given. And the reason we ask these questions is because we observe, I suppose, some initial anomaly that doesn't seem quite right to us, somehow doesn't quite fit. So in the case of Qumran, I think the thing that got me really interested was finding that Qumran, this site, which looks as though it's in the middle of nowhere today, but actually turns out to have been extremely well connected in ancient times by roads and by boat across the Dead Sea. We were told that it was home to a small group of religious Jews. But if it was only a small group of religious Jews, why were there no fewer than 4 cemeteries housing more than 1,000 grave plots? That's what I mean by an anomaly.
Yeah.
And so this draws one in, and if one has a questioning mind, one wants to find an answer, doesn't one? I'm sure you're like that as well, Jason.
I'm sure one does like that, yes. So you, I mean, we've got history's questioned not very often, is it? I mean, we're always harking back to history, and we're always being told that we should do certain things. Wear a poppy in November. If you don't, I mean, on TV, you're castigated and cast out as some sort of heretic or whatever. But like we've come to learn, once your intellectual curiosity takes over and you do allow that to happen, it is quite a rabbit hole, shall we say, that you go down. Tell us about last year. I mean, you had this idea. I mean, last year was the first year of the Questioning History conference. What I've got a few questions. What made you want to do it? I mean, it's a lot to take on. I don't think it's something that I'd be able to even think about organising. And how did it go last year? How was last year's gig, as it were?
Well, I took it on for two reasons. One is because we're told by great minds, for example, the French Voltaire, that history is the lie commonly agreed upon. And another Frenchman, the novelist Balzac, says through a character that there are two histories: official history, which lies, and then secret history, where you find the real cause of events. And then coming closer to home, our own George Orwell has the words through Winston Smith: who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So what this tells us is that these great minds have told us that the version of history handed down to us is invariably not correct. And that this matters because what is said about the past will affect us in the present. And so one reason I thought we must do something about this is because the history that's handed down to us affects us in the present. We can't just say, well, that's history, nothing to do with us now. No, it actually affects us now in the present. Yeah. And the second reason, there were three reasons. The second reason was that I didn't see anybody else doing this job of actually trying to put right the record, which we need to do. We morally need to do this because the past affects the present. And the third reason was that I was privileged to know some astonishing historians. And really without that third aspect, without knowing these astonishing historians and without these historians being willing to come and talk at the event, we wouldn't have had the event. So it's a combination of those three things. And of course, the other reason I wanted to do this is because I think those of us who have intellectual curiosity are perhaps not the majority, we're not the mainstream. And no. It can be quite difficult if you're not the mainstream asking questions. And I did think that if we had a residential event that people could attend, it would be an opportunity for people to share ideas with like minds and maybe form new connections, new friends. And that's actually happened after last year's events. Some people have paired off romantically and some people have formed new friendships. And I like to think that what we're doing is creating a community of like-minded people, or helping to create a community of like-minded people. And people told me that they really enjoyed last year. And one person who I was speaking to just yesterday, I asked for her feedback on the event because I didn't want to impose my thinking on it. So I just took down some notes from what she said. And she said that she thought all the talks were extremely interesting and well presented, and that it was good value for money. That's important in the difficult times we're living in now. That as far as people were concerned, they were all very varied, very positive people. She liked the fact that a lot of people came, of course, from the UK, but there were also people from overseas. There was somebody from Spain, another person came all the way from Hong Kong, another from Germany, via South America, where they were actually on holiday. So they came all the way back from South America, only to return afterwards to complete their holiday in South America. And then, last but not least, she said that the venue was very nice. Top of her list was the kind of intimate atmosphere at the venue. But she also talked about the good food, and yes, it was good. You can go for second helpings, third helpings, and they have a very varied menu that caters for average cuisine, average tastes, meat eating tastes, as well as for vegetarian and even vegan tastes. So that was the feedback I got, and she also commented on how pleasant the staff were and how well organised the event was. But several people said to me that they really liked not only the talks but the opportunity afforded to meet like-minded people. And people said they really would like, if there was one criticism they had, it was that there wasn't enough time to talk to people. So this year, I thought, well, I'll make it a 2-night event, because that will give people 2 evenings, 2 dinners where you can mingle with other people. And what we did last year was fit in talks after dinner that people in the audience could present if they wanted to. So there'll be more time for that if people wanted to do that. But I remember last year we all adjourned as a group to the rather lovely, how can I describe it? The sitting room area. The sitting room doesn't really
piano room.
The what?
The piano room.
Yes. And we were just sitting until the early hours, just chatting as a group.
And there's nothing better than that, is there? When you've just met new people, and they have got the same, perhaps not the same complete values and beliefs as you, but you can at least sit and talk and have a conversation. And when you meet somebody new, I mean, that can be quite stimulating. So there's a huge social aspect of this as well.
Well, I would say so, because you're talking to people who are, I would say, without exception, on the same sort of wavelength, and anything goes. The sort of things you'd say in normal circles that would have people rolling their eyeballs, it's just par for the course amongst the sort of people who come to this event.
Yeah. And I suppose the staff. Excuse me. I suppose the staff as well would have been thinking, "Whoa!" I've been to conferences and things like that, overnight, and I think I went to a BCG one a few years ago, and I think the information that you receive in the talks is important, but just as important is the socializing and the realization that you're not on your own, because a lot of people can't communicate with people in their circle in the same way that they can with a complete stranger who just happens to have the same outlook on life. I think that's a huge positive.
I think you're right. And have you found there's almost an immediate connection when you meet people who've read the same sort of information as you have?
Yeah.
Because you're meeting somebody who's on the same sort of wavelength, I suppose. And there's something very exciting about that, which you can't easily find in day-to-day life, I don't think.
No.
In fact, a friend of mine was saying it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So here you can remove that problem, because here we have a group of people collecting together, and anybody who's interested in questioning history will be of a questioning mind. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interested in coming. But they're also
sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say they're also interested in evidence. These are not people who these tend to be people who think quite deeply, I would say, from my experience. They're not boring at all. They're very exciting, interesting, lively people. But they're arguing from evidence for the most part.
Yeah. It's all evidence-based. I mean,
Yes.
That's probably the most important thing for somebody that's really serious about all this stuff. Is that everything that they're getting is evidence-based. It is you're able to check it against. You can make notes, and that I'd suggest anybody that's doing it. I mean, we had a couple of people, a couple of Raconteurs News listeners who went last year and sent me emails telling me that thanking me for having you on, because they had no idea. I mean, it's difficult to get something like this any sort of attention at all anyway. It's hard enough. But we had a couple of people that got in touch with me and said thank you. They'd been to the conference and they'd really enjoyed it.
That's interesting. Yes. And I'm not quite sure where else you would find this, because many of our learning institutions don't present the critical look at history that we try and do in this conference. So, I gave you the example of the Fire of London earlier. I couldn't find a single piece of published writing that actually questioned the official narrative on the Fire of London, i.e. that it had started in a fire that started by accident in the bakery of Thomas Fariner. There is absolutely nothing published on that until I wrote this article last year.
Right, so we can refer to it as the Pudding Lane false flag.
Yeah, and in fact, it's funny you should say that, because there were some fascinating comments that appeared beneath the article. And I really recommend that anybody who looks at the article also reads the comments, because some of them were quite explicitly making that point. Yeah. And they were drawing analogies with more recent events of history.
We've got a couple of questions. This one here, someone said, what's her views? I think he means you, Gloria. On the pyramids being older and being underwater at some point in history.
Sorry, what being underwater?
The pyramids.
I will pass on that one, because I don't like to profess expertise for something I don't have expertise on.
One more question I want to ask you is, it's in December, this conference, and it was in December last year as well, wasn't it? I mean, yes. Did that have an impact? I know most people that would be coming to this wouldn't really be bothered about what time of year it is, and but I would imagine it would be quite a busy time of year for the venue.
Well, it is, and there's a nice lively atmosphere in the air, and they've got a Christmas tree and all the lovely things about that time of year, lights and so on. And it's quite nice to come together at the time of the year when the planet is in the Western Hemisphere at its darkest, because we can be happy, we can celebrate with like-minded people. And then, of course, a lot of the authors have books for sale. So if you haven't done all your Christmas shopping by that point, it's you have the wonderful opportunity to buy signed copies of books by, as I say, remarkable historians. Like, I can talk a little bit about this year's program if you'd like, and some of the fascinating talks that they've agreed to offer.
Yeah, we should do that. We should do that. Yeah. God, sorry, Gloria, you carry on. I'm trying to do 100 things at once and listen.
Yes. So, and of course, at that time of the year, people are prepared to have some time off. That's the other thing, isn't it? A lot of the dates of this are the 18th to the 20th of December. And most people aren't going into work anymore at that point. So they can give themselves a break. They can give themselves a bit of a present at the end of the year and go off and do something stimulating. So the event will kick off on the Friday, that's the 18th of December, with Mark Devlin, writer and historian extraordinaire. I mean, if there's somebody who uses evidence well and meticulously, I would say it's Mark. And he's going to kick off the event at 4:30 with the history of the pandemic. And I'm sure many of your listeners will know that back 10 years ago, back in 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation published a document entitled Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. And it presented 4 scenarios, one of which the report dubbed Lockstep. And that scenario, would you believe it, deals with a global pandemic which leads to mass shutdowns across the world. I'm sure that Mark will be talking about that, if not earlier events. But
that would be 2010.
2010, and the report also talks about the fact that in the event of a scenario such as that, where we have a global pandemic, leadership will become autocratic, and there'll be no further place for human creativity. Interesting, no? And then just 2 years later, there was, of course, the London Olympics, and an aerial view of the auditorium showed a shape that was remarkably similar to the symbol that's being used to represent the virus, or as some doctors over in America would describe it, the exosome, the body's cell that's there to resist stress. And yeah, I don't know if you've seen that there's a remarkable video doing the rounds, which actually presents us with an aerial view of the auditorium. And the outline, the perimeter of this, is shaped exactly like the symbol that's being used for the virus. And then if we fast forward to last year, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security hosted an event with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on a global pandemic exercise. Well, this was October last year.
Yeah.
Well, this is very interesting. This is part of the history. And of course, if we go back even further, the statutory basis for the lockdown, as you know, I'm sure, comes from the Public Health Act, 1984. And of course, that year immediately fast forwards us to George Orwell's novel of that name.
Yeah.
And famously, George Orwell talks about the newspeak that's very much part of the totalitarian society that he describes as connected with 1984. And I don't know if you know, but George Orwell actually wrote a really interesting essay on newspeak. And if you analyze the 3 elements of newspeak that George Orwell describes, well, I have to say it bears an uncanny resemblance to many of the aspects of the COVID lexicon that we're seeing today, whether it's the sort of concrete language of stay safe or the hybrid words that are created like the new normal, which is almost like a single word, or lockdown, which is again like 2 words locked together. And the third category of word that George Orwell describes is a language of technical, is a technical vocabulary describing scientific concepts. And what George Orwell says is that this third category of language allows no room for discussion because it announces a fact as a fait accompli and not something for discussion. And some people might say that this is true of some of the language that we're presenting with. Even the phrase COVID-19, it announces that as a fact. It's not something that we can discuss and debate. It is a fact.
Yeah.
And so it'd be very interesting to see what angles Mark Devlin chooses to take. But I'm certainly really looking forward to his talk, given the extraordinary analytical mind that he has.
Yeah, I'm just saying we had Mark on not so long ago, a couple of months ago. I think when it first started, I don't know if you remember, but he did a video that went quite viral, which he was having a rant about not being able to go anywhere and do anything, and we had him on just after that, and he's a man of great passion, and somebody who knows his stuff. I mean, you wouldn't want to argue with him over anything, because he knows his stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, he's if he's telling me, then he's researched it and he's done it. He's done all the legwork, and he's done me a favour. But when you talk about new speed, I mean, I think that started off. It's probably before, but I think it started off in the 90s with Blair, when they started calling, instead of calling it lying, they called it spin. As if that was something that was acceptable. It's spin. It's spin. It's what politicians do. It's like the new normal. The new normal. I didn't like the old normal. I don't want a new one.
No. And in fact, I have friends who coined the phrase the new abnormal, and there is a way of thinking that says we shouldn't actually buy into the existing lexicon. We should use an alternative lexicon. So instead of the new normal, we talk about the new abnormal. Instead of social distancing, we talk about antisocial distancing. Instead of COVID-19, we talk about COVID-1984. Only today somebody suggested that to me. But as you say, Mark is extremely analytical, very evidence-based, but also quite humorous. He's a lovely person to listen to.
So you've got him. He's doing 3 talks, isn't he, Mark?
Yes. This another talk is really intriguing. This one on. We like to think that a lot of movements are grassroots movements, but he'll be talking about the involvement of the intelligence services in the hippie movement. Well, there's a thought, isn't it? We like to think that just came from grassroots.
Again, it's been on this show. We've had Neil Sanders also, who's done quite a bit of work on that as well. Another researcher that I respect. But yeah, Mark Devlin's done a talk. We have spoken shows, and it's incredible the amount of people in the 60s hippie movement, the musicians that were successful, that also had intelligence family members who were in the intelligence. When you find out what was Jim Morrison, what his dad was on. He were a captain of a ship or something. I don't know. I can't quite remember. The thing is with me is I hear a lot of stuff and a lot of the details drift away. But yeah, I mean,
you're absolutely right. I think there was a military base at Laurel Canyon, and these singers' parents just happened to be working there. Yes, so it'd be fascinating to hear evidence that perhaps this wasn't the grassroots movement that we thought it was. And then his third talk will be on the BBC. What do we know about this? Well, that's intriguing, isn't it, as a question? Especially since earlier this year, there was a big restructure of the news setup at the BBC. And that led to the redundancy of 450 employees and the creation of a centralized, what they call story team. So that somewhat marginalised the independent journalist. Now everything has to go through, well, this was from before COVID, everything is routed through the story team. And, well, it hardly needs me to say that there are questions to be asked of the BBC. I mean, why was the lid kept on the Jimmy Savile scandal for so many years? Why did the Director General, George Entwistle, who asked why the Newsnight report on Jimmy Savile hadn't been broadcast, why did he resign the following year?
Yeah.
Well, these questions are still very relevant today. And so it will be fascinating to hear what Mark offers us on the subject of the BBC.
I just want to acknowledge the people in the chat room. I am reading your comments, but it goes quite fast, so sometimes they get out of the way. Dave Iron said, talking about Jim Morrison's dad, I think he was the admiral at the Bay of Tonkin, which was another false flag said Spanish chicken is the Bay of Pigs. We know that nearly cost. In fact, that probably cost Kennedy his life, didn't it? The Bay of Pigs. Because he pulled the plug on the whole thing after the complete disaster, so that probably rubber stamped his death certificate. The BBC, I mean, there's a guy called he's an ex-BBC guy, and I've subscribed to him on YouTube, and he keeps asking. He's particularly miffed at certain people at the BBC. Primarily Jeremy Vine, but he's called Alex Belfield, I think, and if you find him on YouTube, it's interesting. He talks about the BBC and how oh, here we go. We've lost. Seems that we've lost Gloria. How boring her. Gloria, I'm sure we'll get you back soon. I hope. Anyway. We're talking to Professor Gloria Moss. We're talking about the question in history, 18th till 20th of December 2020 in Hertfordshire. It's a 3-day event. It's got as we were saying, Mark Devlin is doing 3 shows, 3 talks, should I say. And then we've got Gerry Docherty. He's the author of Secret Origins of the First World War. He's going to be there as well when hopefully we'll get Gloria back soon. Great show, Alex Belfield. Yeah, he's pretty good. I like him anyway. He's always having a bash at the BBC. Yes, we seem to have lost Gloria. It's a shame. We're going so well and all. We're going so well. I've got everything down here. Gerry Docherty. It's talking about World War I was prolonged unnecessarily. The reasons were economic, long term. Then we've got Andrew Goff, who's a documentary filmmaker and editor-in-chief of the Heretic magazine. Heretic. Did I get that right? If you're listening, Gloria, all you've got to do is just click back on the link that I sent you before, and you should be okay just to get back on. I don't know whether a phone's gone or anything. I'll see if I can find out for you. But anyway, how are you? Moon landings, Disney Studios. Mahat Malevolence says, yep. I agree with you there, Mahat Malevolence. Yep. Alex got a loose lip and shoots from the hip. Lol. Yeah, he does do that. He's okay. He's a decent fella. Well, he's all right. He's entertaining. That's what I do. But I've been watching quite a lot of these psychology videos about where people have been. It studies footage of people who are being questioned by the police, and gives some analytical stuff on that. So I don't know what we're going to do now. What do we do now? We've lost her. Let me text her. Let me send her a text message. This is free. This is new. This is good listening for you. Jim Davison is good TV, says Spanish chicken. I don't know what I've done with my phone. Put it somewhere under my ass or something. Oh, Crime Bodge, Jason. Never heard of them. Crime Bodge? They do something about coppers, don't they? Now, where has Gloria gone? Let me see if I can text her. If I can find my phone. Did you notice? I did not swear once. Didn't swear a single time. So I can do it when I want to. I don't know what I've done with my phone. Bugger. Oh, bugger. Oh, I seem to have lost my... Oh, here we go. Gloria's back.
The internet went down. Was it something I said?
I don't know. I was talking and suddenly you've gone.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
That's okay, no problem. It probably was something you said.
Hmm?
Let's hope so, eh?
Yes. So shall I go on about continue with some of the wonderful speakers that are coming?
Yes, please. Yes, I've been trying to fill in, and I've been telling people some of the speakers, but yeah, you tell us, give us a more in-depth view of who will be speaking.
Well, another speaker who we were privileged to have last year is GERRY DOCHERTY, the co-author of a remarkable book entitled The Secret Origins of the First World War, where he argues frightening truth that that dreadful war, the First World War, was actually planned by a small cabal working out of London. Horrific. And this year, he's going to offer 3 talks. One on the way that the First World War was actually prolonged unnecessarily. And you might ask, why would they prolong a dreadful war? Well, according to him, and I imagine this may be what he might communicate to us, the reasons were primarily economic, because Britain had the long-term aim of permanently destroying Germany's strategic potential, because Germany was doing better than Britain in many ways, according to GERRY DOCHERTY. They had more Nobel Prize-winning scientists, they were economically more advanced, and they were building a railway line up to the oil fields. I mean, these are not pleasant truths, but they're not truths that you will encounter through official history.
No. So, I mean, going to the Second World War, it's just that when you said that it was unnecessarily prolonged, when I spoke to my granddad, not long before he died, actually, I think it was first time he'd spoken about it, because he never wanted to speak about it, about the war. But he said that what he said to me, and what stood out for me, was he said it went on for longer than it should have done, because everybody sort of like backed off and didn't want to, be the last person killed before the war ended. So a lot of people were sort of, backing off and not putting everything into it. So the war became prolonged naturally through that. I mean, is there any sign that was the same for the First World War, or do you think it was economic?
I mean, I don't want to second guess what he'll say, but he has written that Lord Kitchener, who was an advocate of a quick and fair peace, was actually sent to Russia in an unescorted, obsolete, coal-burning cruiser, that it went through a known minefield. And then when assistance was needed, that assistance to the sinking ship was delayed. So your reading of that may be similar to my own.
Right.
This wasn't an accident.
And of course,
there were economic reasons for continuing the war.
Of course, we got the in 1912 we got the Titanic disaster, which had a number of people on board that were against the Federal Reserve Act, which came into power in 1913. I think they delivered it. I think it came into power. They voted on it on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day or something like that, just so that nobody were there, and it went through. But a lot of people who were against it were on the Titanic. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. And what we know about the people that are running the show to make it last as long as they can, because they're making more and more money.
Well, that's one aspect, but also making sure that Germany is knocked out of the equation. And then a third talk, again, from that period of history, but an interesting one, because he's rather targeting a sacred cow, Oxford University, and a number of people who were based at All Souls, the rather hallowed college at Oxford that at the time you could only obtain entry to through a very difficult exam. He'll be talking about how a number of people at All Souls, who are protégés of Lord Milner, who was former High Commissioner of South Africa, how these protégés, which included people like Geoffrey Dawson, Lionel Curtis, and Leo Amery, how they pursued policies that were actually somewhat racist in their implications. So that's rather interesting. He's not afraid to shatter sacred cows. And I really look forward to hearing, because he hasn't published, I don't think, in detail on that particular angle yet. So it'd be very interesting to see what he unveils on that topic. And he's a very engaging speaker, of course, GERRY Docherty, so that will be exciting. And then, well, a completely different topic is being presented to us by Andrew Goff, who was there last year. I think people were incredibly stimulated by his talk last year on Hollow Earth. So he's coming back again this year. And Andrew Goff is a charismatic documentary filmmaker and editor-in-chief of the Heretic magazine, and he's coming back again this year to tell us more about Hollow Earth, because I think he was billed to give an hour's talk last year, and it went on for 2 hours. We didn't want him to stop, and so I can't wait to hear what further information he's going to reveal to us about Hollow Earth.
Can you give me an idea what Hollow Earth is?
The idea is that there are other civilizations living in the heart of planet Earth.
Right.
There aren't just the humans who live on the surface of planet Earth, but there are other civilizations who actually live within the planet. And after all, the Earth is what, 4.5 billion years old, and so it's not surprising if we're not the only race that's populating this planet. And some of the evidence that he presented us with last year was really quite convincing. For example, he talked about a Norwegian, Olaf Jansen, who, quite by accident really, sailed with his father through an entrance to the Earth's interior at the North Pole. I think he was forced off course by a terrible storm. And for 2 years, he lived with the inhabitants of an underground network of colonies. And the people who were part of that colony were, would you believe it, 12 feet tall, and their world, and I think we have this report from many people, was lit by a central sun. So we have to do away with the idea that it's dark down in Hollow Earth. No, there's a lot of talk of sunlight down there and rather beautiful landscapes. Anyway, it's a rather sad tale, because when Olaf returned to Earth and told people his story, people thought he was absolutely crazy, and he was actually locked up in a lunatic asylum for the rest of his life. Poor Olaf. And then if we fast forward to the 1940s and move over to America, then of course we have Admiral Byrd, who led a flotilla of boats to the Antarctic. And when he was flying over the land, was diverted into Hollow Earth and met an extraordinary civilization. Of course, just like Olaf, when he returned to normal, in inverted commas, life on Earth, he wanted to tell everybody what he'd seen, but he was sworn to secrecy on his return. Why? Why did the military insist that what he reported he had seen should be kept secret if it wasn't true? And then Andrew Goff will bring us up to date by talking about his own personal attempts to find Hollow Earth. I mean, he's involved in investigations himself. So I can't wait to hear part 2, really, of his first talk. And he'll be giving a second talk on hidden gold. Gold that was sequestered away from Japan and hidden somewhere in the Philippines. So he'll be telling us about, I think, the views of an Austrian gentleman who thinks he knows where this extraordinary volume of gold is hidden today in the Philippines.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. Is there any recording of his talk last year? Do you video the talks?
Well, I didn't issue any recordings, but he's written a fascinating article, which I can send you the link for his article on Hollow Earth, and it will actually provide very interesting background. It's extremely evidence-based, very detailed, and not remotely glib. I mean, it's really dense and interesting. So I can certainly, with pleasure, send you the link to that. So I can't wait to hear, the part 2 of his talk on Hollow Earth. I mean, it is extraordinary, is it not, to think that we're not alone in living on this planet. Never mind any extraterrestrials that may be living above Earth. To think that there may be civilizations living in the hollow of planet Earth is extraordinary. And maybe this explains the considerable interest that's taken in the Antarctic, because apparently there's some kind of circular entrance way to Antarctic, and it's a no-fly zone.
Yeah, there's a lot of the flat Earth people, they talk about the Antarctic being sort of like a wall around the plane, as they call it. I mean, look, I'm not here advocating flat Earth or anything. I'm just this is just it is like you say. I find it very interesting. Even listening to people who other people say, oh, it's especially flat Earth. I mean, it gets more. It used to. It used to get more flack than anything else, and I really couldn't understand it. But I was really fascinated by what people were saying. But again, that goes towards what you were talking about earlier on, and that's the your intellectual curiosity taking over, and that's what it does for me. You're doing talks yourself as well, aren't you? What are those talks going to be on?
Well, I'm digging back into the past, and I'm offering 2 talks. One on a set of temples that people may not have heard of, your listeners may not have heard of them, but they were extraordinarily important. They're called Asclepian temples. And there were, over 2,000 of these temples in Greece and Asia Minor, which were extremely popular for hundreds of years before the Christian era. And the most famous of these temples were at Olympia, Corinth, Pergamon, and Epidaurus. I mean, to give you a sense of how popular these medical centers were, you've only got to realize that at Epidaurus, there was a theatre that could seat up to 20,000 people. That gives you an idea of the volume of people who were coming to these health centers. And, well, a lot of medicine today is engaged in quite a secretive manner. And I think we have to ask whether the same might not be true of these Asclepian temples. I mean, why were thousands of people coming from far and wide to visit these Asclepian temples? Well, we do know that some of the waters that flowed through Asclepian sites were extremely mineral rich. For example, I mentioned Epidaurus. The waters that flow through Epidaurus have the same mineral content as the alkaline spring waters at Evian in France. It's interesting, isn't it? And so they're very effective in dealing with urinary complaints, complaints of the digestive organs, and complaints of the liver. But there was something else about these centers, and that was something known as incubation sleep. Now, I don't know if you've come across this concept of the incubation sleep, Jason, but this was a special kind of sleep that people experienced when they went to these Asclepian centers. And what we're told happened is this: patients would fall asleep, not just during the night, but during the daytime as well. And they'd wake up and find themselves cured. And this is what made Asclepius so renowned, the fact that people could go, experience this sleep, and wake up cured. No wonder thousands of people flocked to these centers. Well, up until now, historians have said, well, this sleep operated on people's minds. If people were cured, it's because they believed that Asclepius, who, by the way, started life as a mortal, and because of his extraordinary success in curing people, was elevated to the Godhead and deified. Historians have put this down to all the fact that people's minds work extraordinary miracles on the body, and that these cures were purely psychosomatic. What I'm going to suggest in my talk was that actually there's another factor here that is being concealed from history. And the clue lies in many of the inscriptions that we find at these sites of the cures that take place. Let me just give you an idea. I know it's a bit gory and it's fairly late at night, but if you bear with me. So there are inscriptions on 3 columns at Epidaurus that record 70 case histories. Now, I'll give you a taste of these case histories. One includes cutting into a diseased eyeball. Another involves the removal of an abscess after cutting open the person's belly. And another involves the removal of an arrow point from the lung. Moreover, one inscription describes how Asclepius appeared to patients in their dreams as a surgeon. And in fact, the museum at Epidaurus displays medical instruments, including a saw and several scalpels. So are we talking about a cure that's purely psychosomatic? Or maybe not, I'd like to suggest. Rather than assume that the cures had a supernatural origin, as many commentators have assumed, could we not assume that these cures had a physical basis, and a physical basis that has been kept from us for these thousands of years since these temples flourished? what could this have been? Well, one playwright, Aeschylus, writes that Asclepius was a man who could charm back the dead man to life. And another person wrote that he could heal any illness and even resurrect the dead. So what could the physical thing have been that was used at the temple that we haven't been told about? Well, I'd like to suggest that possibly he had access to a soporific drug, a bit like an anesthetic drug, and that at a time when people didn't know about anesthetics, people experienced a sleep. They didn't experience the pain of the surgery, and there, hey presto, they woke up cured from their disease. So in the talk, I'll be going into the centres in more detail. We'll be walking around these centres with images and bringing them back to life, and asking finally, what does this tell us about history? If history hasn't revealed what might really have been going on at Asclepian centres, what else have we not been told about ancient medicine, or even modern medicine for that matter?
Well, I mean, that brings to mind, when you talk about the incubation sleep, are you talking about that would last for how long? Would it just be a normal length sleep, or would it be longer, like you say, an incubation sleep for like a few days? In other words, or would it vary so it depends on how much of this anaesthetic, before anaesthetics were widely known, was being used?
I don't recall having come across any evidence that specifies the length of time of the sleep.
Right.
We know that people slept in a building that was known as the abaton, where they had couches that people would lie on. But beyond that, that detail isn't recorded in these inscriptions. No, but I would imagine, since we know that the sleep took place either during the daytime or night, that maybe it lasted an hour or a little more than that, but certainly not days in length. No.
I don't know if you've come across Andrew K. Fletcher. He is an advocate of inclined bed therapy. I don't know if you've heard about that, but he's had some astonishing results. He's quite ill at the moment. I spoke to him a couple of days ago, and he's quite ill at the moment, but he's been doing his research on inclined bed therapy, and he's had some just sleeping with I think it's a 6-inch incline, so your head is raised 6 inches. And he's had some incredible results with people with such conditions as MS and things like that. I wonder if that's part of this, because he did have pictures of ancient Egyptian beds that had got sort of footboards on the bottom because they were inclined.
Well, that's incredibly interesting, Jason, because actually from the Corinth Asclepian site, we know that the couches were slightly inclined. Absolutely, right. As you say.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is. I mean, I would suggest you have a look, just if you search inclined bed therapy anywhere. There's all sorts of stuff on there about and testimony from people who have. In fact, I did it myself. I had a heart attack in 2015, and I was quite ill. I think we're December 2015, and I was quite ill into 2016. And in April of that year, my missus, who'd been listening to the show, decided to incline our bed, and it made such a difference to me. I was just a completely different person. Only a month later, because where I'd been drawn and thin and what have you, and I know I've not really done very well since, because I've lost a leg and I've nearly lost other one as well this last year. So I've not. But you know, in it, that's due to something that's inside me. So you know, the inclined bed therapy, yeah, it is interesting that you've come across it as well, and the beds were slightly inclined.
It's so interesting what you say, and I'm so sorry to hear about the problems that you've personally had. But that is so interesting, and we know quite a lot about these couches. That they not only had an inclination at one end, but they were fairly narrow.
Yeah.
And they weren't that high off the ground. So yes, they look to me as though they could have been used as beds. And it's difficult to conceive that people were experiencing this surgery. There are no reports of pain being experienced. And in fact, when I looked into anesthesia, I found that accounts right up to the 1st century AD, they were still describing some surgery as being extremely painful. So in other words, some surgeons were still working without the use of anesthetics. But maybe a small group of people had access to soporific drugs and were using them and having the edge, and therefore attracting an enormous clientele. But perhaps that clientele wasn't aware of the fact that this was being used. And of course, I think a lot of professionals often like to keep some of their expertise to themselves. You don't freely give it away because it gives them the edge over other people. So this is...
Sorry, I was just going to say, if there's a few people that have got this notion, anybody that's been through major surgery, I mean, when I had my leg amputated, I was awake, but I was sedated, but I was awake.
Oh.
You know, there are certain things I remember about it. I specifically remember him sawing through my bone, but the sort of things, it's not as if, you know, the sedation that I got, it wasn't as if, I wasn't there thinking, oh, someone's cutting my leg off. I knew what were going on and I knew what were happening, but it was almost as if that guy could have been, you know, the you know, the guy you talked about that came to people while they were sleeping, while they were dreaming, or you know, and then they were cured afterwards. I mean, that could have been the same thing, you know, if people had access to these secrets at that time.
Well, they may have, and it'd be rather wonderful if they did, because it would have expanded the scope of what they could offer to people. And we have to imagine a time in history when there was no health insurance, or very little, if there was any. This must have offered people a ray of hope in a rather dark world without an NHS or American system of health insurance.
Yeah,
and they flourished for hundreds of years, these Asclepian centres. As I say, there were over 2,000 across Greece and Asia Minor, and even into other parts of the world as well.
Well, I visited Ephesus in Turkey, and there were a lot. There was a huge, you know, auditorium arena type thing. That we all sat in. That must have been able to hold a few thousand people, but there were also some buildings and some temples and things like that you wondered what they were for. You know, they just didn't seem to fit in.
Interesting, yeah.
You know, and I don't know, perhaps these places. I remember toilets, they were all in a row, and I just imagine everybody in the morning reading a tablet that they got, you know, the morning tablet paper, newspaper type thing, all in a row, you know, just weird stuff. History is just amazing. It's just something that
it is amazing, and it's so interesting that you say that, Jason, because some of these centres actually had libraries as well as theatres.
Yeah.
As well as baths, because they used hydrotherapy, these centres, and so they must have offered a lifeline to people in a, as I say, rather dark time when healthcare wasn't widely available. So it's very exciting to dig into this and unravel what might have actually been happening there. And then the second talk that I'll give will be putting the spotlight on famous archaeologists and what we know about those famous archaeologists. And I'll be particularly interested here in, well, at least I don't want to give everything away at the moment, leave some surprises, but two of the archaeologists. One is a British archaeologist, Sir Arthur Evans, who was responsible for the excavation of Knossos in Crete. And the other is a French archaeologist, Roland de Vaux, who was responsible for the excavation of this Dead Sea Scroll site of Qumran. And looking at what we know of the background of these two, their educational background, their experience in archaeology, and how this may have influenced the interpretation that they put on these all-important sites. So I don't know if you'd like me to say a little bit about the history of these.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yeah, please. I mean, we're loving it. I'm not massive on history, but I really love hearing new things. So yeah, you carry on.
Well, I find it rather fascinating. Well, Sir Arthur Evans, he was the archaeologist of this famous site, Knossos, that he said was the Bronze Age cradle of European civilization. He said it was a really important site. And he influenced archaeological thinking, for decades. But because he said Knossos was the Bronze Age cradle of European civilization, it was very difficult for archaeologists in any other part of the Mediterranean to argue for an older date, because Knossos was set up as the oldest. And some of this information comes from a really interesting book on the prehistoric history of Malta by a current historian, a Dutch historian, actually. I'll spell her surname. It's Rweedjik. And she says that Arthur Evans set the tone for archaeology for decades because he said that Knossos was the cradle of European civilization in the Mediterranean. What do we know about Sir Arthur Evans? Well, he took a degree in modern history, specifically modern history, at Oxford. Interestingly, he showed himself unable to answer in his finals exam.
Oops. Seems the internet's gone again for Gloria. I can't hear her. I don't know if you lot can, or if it's me or what.
any questions related to the 12th? So anyway, but because of the intervention of an examiner, his name was Edward Augustus Freeman, I believe, he was awarded a first-class degree. And on the strength of that, just, 6 years later, he became keeper of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford.
Right, we missed a slight bit out of that. I don't know how long, probably about 10 or 15 seconds, where you just suddenly cut off. I don't know what you were saying at the time, but obviously somebody didn't like it, and he just got cut off, and then you just came back again. So
well, I was saying he did a degree in modern history at Oxford.
Right.
And despite the fact that he wasn't able to answer any questions relating to the 12th century period or beyond, despite that, he was awarded a first-class degree. Interesting. In modern history. And then, perhaps on the strength of that, 6 years later, he was awarded the post of keeper of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. I'm sure many of your listeners have visited the fine Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. He was the keeper. And then how did he get interested in Knossos? Well, in the same year, I was really surprised to read this. He used family money to buy the site of Knossos. So he actually owned the site of Knossos. He dubbed it the cradle of European civilization and made it very difficult for other archaeologists to argue for older dates for the sites that they were looking at. And according to the Dutch historian that I mentioned, she suggests that this set back the history of prehistory in Malta for decades, because historians were vilified for suggesting dates older than 3,000 years for the numerous temples that we find in ancient Malta. I mean, she in fact suggests a date of 8,000 BC, arguing that they're the oldest temples in the Mediterranean area. All very interesting, but is that not interesting about Sir Arthur Evans? So in the talk, I'll talk more about Malta. I'll talk more about the effect of his influence on many other archaeologists and the views that they were predisposed to take of history. Then if we move across to the Dead Sea Scroll site of Judea, Qumran, that's a very famous site, as we know. It was excavated, well, it was discovered in 1946 by a Bedouin shepherd. And then it was excavated over a period of 5 years between 1951 and 1956. And it was excavated under the direction of a Frenchman, Roland de Vaux, V-A-U-X, who was a Catholic and head of an organization that was called the École Biblique in Jerusalem. And he was the main archaeologist, Roland de Vaux. He was a priest, a Catholic priest, and according to his interpretation of the site, which has set the tone for future interpretations, I have to say, this was home to a group of monks, inverted commas, who prayed most of the day and ritually immersed themselves in the numerous baths that you can find at the site. And he described many of the locations on the site in monastic terms. So he talks about a scriptorium, refectory. These are the sort of words that you would associate with a monastery from the medieval era. Interesting. So what do we know about Roland de Vaux himself?
Okay.
Well, I have to say I was rather intrigued to read that he didn't have actually a background as an archaeologist. Is that not surprising?
Well, yeah, just a bit.
This is such an important site at the intersection of Christianity and Judaism, we're told.
So what was his background then?
Well, he was a religious man. He was from a community of Dominican friars whose brief was to renew biblical studies at a time when modern criticism, whether in history or other fields, was challenging the traditional understanding of the sacred text. And he was put in charge, as I say, despite not being an archaeologist and despite having only learnt about archaeology from his contact with archaeologists.
Wow.
And so this really brings us full circle. We're questioning history, I think with good reason. Can we always trust the version of history, often the official version, that people have handed down to us, whether they're historians or whether they're the archaeologists? And in the case of Qumran, something really interesting happened in the 1990s. And that was when a professor of archaeology from Belgium University, the Catholic University of Louvain, was called in to look at Roland de Vaux's original inventory. And her name was a lady, Pauline Donsil-Voot. And what she found was nothing short of extraordinary. Of course, I'll say more in the talk, but she found with two main finds. One, she found that many of the items inventoried by Roland de Vaux were no longer in existence. So, for example, a third of the coins that he had inventoried could no longer be found. 1/3 of the coins had completely disappeared. Coins are very important because they help you date a site. We all know that. And the second thing she found was that she found many objects which had not actually appeared in Roland de Vaux's inventory. And these included some extraordinary items. For example, she found juglets, which she said may have contained extraordinary herbal substances worth an absolute fortune. And she actually names one of them, balsam. Balsam was one of the most precious substances of the day, worth twice as much as silver. And it wasn't inventoried by Roland de Vaux. So in the talk, I'll ask, why was it omitted? What story would unfold were we to look at balsam and learn about its uses at the time? And so we really have to question history. We can't take what we're told, whether it's about Pudding Lane or whether it's about the absence of Hollow Earth. We can't take any of this at face value. We can't take what we're told about the First World War, or you mentioned the Second World War. We can't take any of this without critical evaluation. And we can do this in the pleasant surroundings of a lovely venue, easily accessible from London and easily accessible from airports, because people flew in from, as I say, from Spain, Germany, Hong Kong, even Yorkshire. We can discuss the evidence.
Yeah. It is hypercritical that we do this. The problem that we've got is that we live in an emotion-based society, and not a critical thinking-based society. I mean, everything's emotion. Just you've only got to look at TV ads and look at what the sounds and the songs and the rubbish that they put on advertisements, and it's all emotion based, and we are in an emotion based society. And if you do question something that perhaps somebody holds dear, you're in danger of offending them, whereas you're not really. All you're doing is you just want to want to bring in a critical element to their emotional response to what they're doing. I mean, people are married to these things that history is telling us, aren't they? That it is difficult to get somebody away from something that they believe in on an emotional level. They're invested in.
Well, I agree. I mean, emotion has an important part to play in many areas of study. For example, in the reading of literature. My first degree was in French, for example, and I spent a wonderful 4 years immersing myself in French literature. And of course, there was an emotional component to that. But there was also a very intellectual element to that, because what we were invited to do was to actually examine how the author achieved the effects that they achieved. And we come back to the word that we've used many times, Jason, which is evidence. We need to evidence our conclusions. We cannot undertake historical inquiry, scientific inquiry without evidence. One of the first things we do when we write up a scientific study or social scientific study, which is an area I've engaged in many years, is produce a methodology section. We have to set out the methodology that we're using. Without a valid methodology, our conclusions fall flat. Everything hangs on methodology. And I do believe that people learning history today, many boards offer a paper in sources. People are encouraged to look at the issue of sources and discuss the reliability or lack of reliability of sources. So one has to critically engage, whether it's with history or literature. We can't rely on emotion alone. My goodness.
No, but that is what our society is run by emotion. As you can see at the moment, the people that are wearing masks aren't wearing masks because they think that it's an emotional base, and it's not because they think there's a deadly virus. It's they think that they perhaps could be, and you know they don't want they don't want to be the one that spreads it if it is, you know, they don't want to be the one that's to blame. And again, that's all. This is all emotion led, as you can see with all the logos and nonsense that come up, you know, save the NHS and do this and do that and have another, you know, it's interesting to meet people, to find people that are wanting to critically think and not just emotion based. You know, on my show, a lot of people do have emotional based reactions to things. It's only natural. That's because we're in this. I mean, you try telling an old bloke that the Second World War was not quite as we thought it were, and it were the first. Well, I can't say First World War because there's nobody left. But you know, from Second World War, if they said it were led on. It was elongated longer than it needed to be, and that caused the death of you know, you sort of one for one. If he don't believe you, or he's going to defend what him and his mates did, and rightly so, all those years ago.
Yeah. But can you imagine a court of law that's based on emotion? I mean, people wouldn't buy into that.
Well, we've got that anyway.
And evidence is, and I think, given what we said earlier, that we have a moral obligation to make sure that the history that we believe in is correct. Because as we said earlier, quoting George Orwell, who controls the past controls the future. You know, we have to make sure that the history that we buy into is valid, is reliable. We have a moral obligation to do this, I think, and it can be fun as well. You know, people enjoy detective stories. You know, I think Agatha Christie is one of the best-selling novelists of the world. Looking into history is really a giant detective story. It's a whodunit, or at a number of different levels, isn't it? Who done it? What did they do? Why did they do it? It's you know, all the questions that pop up in an Agatha Christie novel, the who, the why, the what, the how, emerge when one questions history. What could be more enjoyable? Really?
Sorry, a couple of names have popped up in the chat room, and people want me to ask you about them and what are your thoughts. First is David Irving. I don't know if you're aware of him or if you have any thoughts on him at all. But somebody in the chat room has asked me to ask you about him.
Well, I haven't personally read his history, so right. I can't comment on that. But I have heard people say that he was a fluent German speaker and that he was able to access, because we talked about evidence, he was able to access original documents that perhaps other people hadn't accessed before. So I can't comment on the history, but as a method, of course, using original sources is one of many different important things to be able to use.
Right. Okay. And I don't know if Edgar Casey, I don't know if that was to do with you or somebody just put. I'll tell you what they put. They put hi Jace, where are we? Where's he gone? Yeah, great chat. Edgar Casey, if you get time, please. Edgar Casey mean anything to you, or is that somebody that you want me to get on to?
I don't know if I've got the right person, but there's somebody called Jason Wilcox, is it? Who claims to be a reincarnation of, have I got this right?
David Wilcox.
David Wilcox claims to be a reincarnation.
David Wilcox, yeah.
Yes. And I'm aware of some of his work, because I read a book he wrote called The Source, which I found fascinating on the power of humans to influence the material and non-material world around them through the power of thought, which takes one into such interesting realms of thinking. And I remember in that book reading about a machine in American University, which was a random generator of numbers. I don't know if you read about this machine. And it literally randomly generates numbers in a completely random fashion. And he said there were 2 occasions when the numbers stopped being generated in this random way. And one occasion was when the O.J. Simpson trial was taking place and he was about to be sentenced. And that was the point when the machine stopped producing random numbers. And the second point was after the death of Princess Diana. And what one explanation offered by people is that so many people were tuning into these events that they were able to influence even something as physical as a random number generator.
So how would you know that the numbers generated aren't random?
Well, there were patterns emerging that hadn't emerged before, and so they were suggesting that the power of emotion, you mentioned emotion, that emotions that people were experiencing across the globe. I mean, I'm of a generation, so I remember the O.J. Simpson trial. I think a very high proportion of people would have been turning on their television to watch what the verdict was. And of course, there was a mass outpouring of grief at the time and shock at the time of Princess Diana's death. And I think one explanation is that this emotion was actually affecting the physical world. But we can never know. And it's a bit like questioning history. We can come up with a theory to explain history.
I mean, you would expect that if that was the case, you know, the O.J. Simpson trial, it wasn't being sentenced. It was the verdict, weren't it? Because he was found not guilty. But everyone, like you say, the whole world were watching that Princess Diana. But then, I mean, you would have expected a similar result on 9/11. Was there any?
I think the book was written pre 9/11, so I think that wasn't
right. Okay, got you.
Yeah. So you know, how can one not have a curious mind when there is so much to explore in the world that we live in? And history is ripe for the picking in terms of exploration. And if people enjoy detective novels, they can't fail but be interested in history because it's real and it affects the present day.
Well, it does.
I mean, I think when the theatres were open, The Mousetrap was billed as the longest running production in theatre history. And that's a whodunit mystery. You know? So people love mysteries. History is nothing but mysteries. But to find answers, we have to draw on evidence as much as we can. I mean, we've got 2 sides to the brain, and we need to bring these 2 sides of the brain together, don't we, to work in harmony.
In order to find out the truth, you first of all you need to ask the question, don't you?
Yes.
And that's I think that's the biggest obstacle for most people, is being able to ask that question and then answer it critically to themselves.
I think that's absolutely spot on. It's asking the questions. And they typically begin with one of these words, you know, why, who, what, how. Why was the First World War prolonged? What lies below the mantle of the earth? Why was Sir Arthur Evans the excavator of Knossos? And as soon as you ask these questions, you arrive at very interesting destinations, don't you? So
Yeah,
as
it is.
you say, it's all about asking the right questions in the first place.
I've been through enough stuff, and I've seen enough things that even things that I've kept to myself, because nobody believe them, and I've been through things, and to think that this 3D, this MFI world that we live in, which is what it is, the reality that most people live in is this MFI world. And if you can't open your mind to other things, to there at least being some other things, and to the point that you're so afraid of it that you'll mock it, you will start mocking it, rather than thinking for yourself and thinking, hang on a minute, just maybe one of these that you won't do that. I mean, that's I've been using this phrase for when is it? 2015 this started. So 5 years, nearly 5 years. Raconteurs News has been going. It'll be 5 years in January next year. So, and I've been saying this from the beginning. People need to grow up. It's the fact that we're kept in perpetual. Most people are kept in a perpetual state of adolescence, where just able enough to carry out the menial tasks that they've got to do, but any critical thinking is completely off the remit. And anybody that's in an institution really has to think, or at least appear to think along the lines that the university would be going along. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do absolutely. And maybe if our institutions are not allowing us to ask questions, maybe it's time to evolve new institutions, perhaps. Maybe this is where this needs to go, and maybe this initiative can evolve into something bigger. And and I'm certainly happy to plough back any surplus funds into helping that on its way, because I think asking questions is as natural to human beings as sleeping and eating. I mean, what do toddlers do? What do young children do endlessly? It can be quite irritating for parents some of the time.
Oh, God.
They ask endless questions. Why? What? And in a bus situation, it can be quite embarrassing because the parents are supposed to have the answers. And they look pretty. Everybody's listening to what the listening into this conversation on the bus because you can't avoid it. Children are endlessly asking questions. It's such a natural part of being a human being. Yeah. And we have to encourage that through our education system. And
if you get your kids when they're at an age where they are doing that, I mean, I've got I remember a classic. My stepson, I think he must have been about 7 or 8. And he was always, he was just in your ear all the time. He were really like, getting on your nerves. And everything he said, and if you answered him, he'd go, why? And I said to him, he says, he asked me for something. And I said, no, you can't have it. And he said, why? And I said, you ask me why one more time and I'm going to take your PlayStation off you.
Oh.
And he said, what for?
Another question. Yes.
The same question, just worded differently. And they were only about,
yes.
That's ingenious kids can be.
Yeah. I mean, irritating though it may feel at the time, it's rather wonderful because we learn. How can we learn if we don't ask questions? As you say, everything begins with the question.
Yeah.
And then that would mean we can never tell at the beginning where the answer is going to lead us. really. That's why it's so exciting. And I often wonder why people enjoy detective stories rather than really delving into real history, because it's every bit as exciting, if not more, because it affects us in the present. And we have a moral obligation to do this, I think. But on a lighter-hearted note, we can also enjoy ourselves in the process and meet like-minded people.
Yeah,
have a good time.
And the social aspect is just as important. Now, just tell everybody the dates. Go over the speakers again. Tell people where they can find your website, where they can find how to how they can get themselves some tickets. I'm sure there's different packages available. It's in a wonderful setting, like you said. So just give us the rundown, sell it to us.
Well, it's in a centre, 30 minutes from Liverpool Street by train. You take the train to a place called Broxbourne, or if you're in London, you can drive there. There's plenty of parking, and it's an old country manor, really, quite large with grounds. And the package includes, if you want to stay, 2 nights en suite accommodation in rather pleasant rooms, all food provided. That's lunch, dinner, teas, coffees, hot chocolates on tap. That's quite nice in December when it's quite cold. And as I say, food to cater for all diets, whether it's average diet or the vegetarian diet or the vegan diet. Big helpings, you can go back for seconds and thirds. And we all sit together and we all eat together, which is very nice. That's how we create new contacts. And what else can I say? There are day tickets available for those who can't free up the time. It starts 4 o'clock on the Friday, the 18th of December, and finishes at 4 o'clock on Sunday. That's important because it gives you time to travel back wherever you've got to get back to before midnight. And there's a package for the Friday to the Sunday, all-inclusive package, all talks, all accommodation, all food. And people who can't spare that time, then there's day tickets, half-day ticket for the Friday, full-day tickets for Saturday or Sunday. And the website to go to is www.learningholidays, one word, learningholidays.webs, webs.com. And please do phone if you like to chat about anything. And the mobile number, can I give a mobile number, Jason?
Yes, of course you can.
Is 0777 1535087.
And again.
Good point. 0777, that's 3 sevens, 1535087. And any question, whatever it is, please don't hesitate to phone. And you ask for a reminder of the speakers. There's Mark Devlin giving the opening talk on the history of the pandemic and how the intelligence services may have had a role in the hippie movement. And he doesn't stop there, because he'll also be talking about the BBC and what do we know about that. Notice the question what, really important question word there. And GERRY Docherty, do you remember the historian of the First World War, talking about various aspects of that. Andrew Goff will be talking about Hollow Earth and the hidden treasure from Japan to the Philippines. I'll be giving 2 talks, one on the Greek Asclepian centers and what were they really involved in for the hundreds of years in which they were operating. And what does this tell us about medicine more generally? I mean, if they were operating secrets, is that continuing into the present day with the current system? Are they keeping information from us or not? and also talking about historians and archaeologists. What do we know about their backgrounds? And there is another speaker that I haven't mentioned because I notice we're running out of time here, and that's Professor David Bates, who's a very fine historian, as of course all our other speakers, and he'll be talking about the Bayeux Tapestry. Many people have visited the Bayeux Tapestry in Normandy, in the town of Bayeux. And he'll be looking at the Bayeux Tapestry, for which he's an expert, written several books, and asking whether this is a piece of propaganda. What is propaganda? And and how can we use an understanding of the history of the time, which the Bayeux Tapestry focused on the claim to the throne of William I as against Edward the Confessor. So I asked him which of these two had the better claim, William I, William of Normandy, or Edward the Confessor, and was William I a usurper, or did Edward Confessor give him the crown on his deathbed? And he said it was neither. It was somewhere in between. So I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, waiting to see what Professor Bates is going to tell us about the Bayeux Tapestry, and did the Normans have a legitimate claim to the British throne in 1066? I can't wait to hear what he has to say.
Wow. Wow, it sounds like it's going to be a great weekend. Learning holidays. If anybody just does a search on your favourite search engine, whatever that is, learning holidays, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. I'll put a link to it in the description below when this is over with, and you can go and find out who the speakers are. I've had a look at it's a pretty full calendar over the weekend, but it's also there's also a lot of time to be able to interact with other people and make new contacts and meet new people.
Absolutely.
People that you would have never met.
People you'd never have met. Who can become lifelong friends. And if I could just add one thing, on Friday evening and Saturday evening, because it's a 3-day event, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, anybody who's got a topic that they've researched and find very interesting, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And then, I tell you how to forward a synopsis, because we have some spaces for people who want to take the floor and present their own questioning history, research and findings. And we had some very rich material presented last time. Excellent.
Okay, well, we've gone over by about 3 minutes. And earlier on when we were talking just before the show, Gloria, you sort of like went 2 hours. But it's just flown by, and we've had some great input from people in the chat room. People have really enjoyed the show tonight, and I'm sure there'll be some people from our listenership or anybody that listens to this afterwards that will be attending. I know a couple off the top of my head that I think that will definitely probably be there. But anyway,
that's great. And everybody will have a very warm welcome, and you're joining a community of like-minded people. So even though you may not know anybody at the beginning, you'll come away with many more contacts and friends.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thanks very much, Gloria. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And that's the end of the show, guys. Thanks to everyone in the chat room for your input and for your continued support as well. And everybody watching on Facebook and YouTube. It's been a good show. I'll let you know when I'm going to be back on. I'm definitely going to be back on next Tuesday. Tuesday's definitely going to be always the day. Okay, and then it'll be another one in the week. So I'm going to do a floating one. So the Tuesday will be definite. every week, and there'll be a floating one in the week as well, and there may be an after dark. And also, I'm in touch with somebody who should be just ideal for this show. Hopefully she'll have emailed me, and we'll get her on. But in the meantime, everybody stay safe, and remember, just keep whatever's dear to you, keep it close, and don't let it go away from you, because there are people that are trying to, get in between. Also, it's just at the moment, it's just full on attack. Just please, just be nice to each other. Even if someone's nasty to you, be nice back, and then they might get the message, and these people won't win. So anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks for listening to Raconteurs News. I'll see you very soon. Thank you very much to Gloria, and like I say, go learning holidays. Go get yourself down to Hertfordshire. Mark Devlin's worth the worth the money on his own, said somebody in the chat room earlier on. So thanks very much. Cheers. Take care, everybody.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.